Welcome one and all back in to The Future is Female. I'm your host, Gabrielle Ducharme, joined here as always by my legendary co-host, Nicole Pinter. This week, though, guys, we have a very, very special guest, good friend of mine, a very, very good proponent for the topics we're going to be discussing today. Amna Subhan is joining us today. Amna, thank you so much for coming on The Future is Female. We're happy to have you. How are you doing on this fine Thursday morning?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you guys so much for having me. This is so exciting.
It's extremely exciting, right? I feel like we've all kind of crossed paths at some point in Blaze, but we've never all collaborated on a project. So I'm excited that, of course, we're going to collaborate today. Guys, we took last week off. I was at home. Nicole, she was getting her wisdom teeth pulled. She's good now, luckily. Nicole, how are you doing on this fine Thursday morning?
All things considered, okay. I was not looking forward to this for very obvious reasons. Not you, Amna. It's because of Gabby.
Yeah, for the people on the radio who can't see my screen right now, you all saw the Twitter beef between the two of us. Michigan is Nicole's school. UCLA is mine. Yes, we both go to ASU, but the allegiance is still split along those lines. And we're going to get to the Michigan UCLA stuff in a bit, but I'm wearing a UCLA hat and I have my little Bruin bear that my aunt made me like 6 years ago. Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit. You have to be living under a rock to not know what I'm referencing for the NCAA men's Final Four. But guys, before we get to what's going on the basketball court right now, Final Four matchups this weekend, some pretty big stuff is happening off the court that could have far bigger ramifications than like UCLA going from the first four to the Final Four in the span of like 2 weeks. Far bigger ramifications than Michigan men's basketball, losing in the NCAA tournament. The Supreme Court
has begun... lamest way you could ever bring that up. Just get to the...
I had to. The Supreme Court has begun hearings on the NCAA versus Alston case on Wednesday. It was just 24 hours ago from the time we are recording this show. Nicole, do you want to take the lead on this one?
Yeah, I'll run through some of what's been happening between the NCAA and the players as well. So Wednesday the Supreme Court began hearing oral arguments for the NCAA versus Alston case. This is a case from back in 2014, I believe. The NCAA arguing that college athletes are not workers and are not entitled to pay, and more so that courts shouldn't be allowed to influence NCAA rules. This is what the original case was precedent on. NCAA brought it back up. This is their doing. Not looking good for the NCAA so far. The Supreme Court won't announce its ruling until June, but man, they were getting grilled from every side. I mean, Justice Amy Coney Barrett was poking at the, consumers love to watch, unpaid athletes. Like, yeah, that's what we like. And they were really going at it from all corners of just how bogus the NCAA is. That's the best way I can put it. The other thing that's happening today, before we kind of go around the circle here, leaders of the #NotNCAA property movement met with NCAA President Mark Emmert and Senators Richard Blumenthal and Cory Booker Thursday morning. This is a call as a recording that could still be going on. This is what I have up to date as of right now. So the players on the call are Isaiah Livers, Geo Baker, Jordan Bohannon, Caitlin Clark, Hannah Hall, Naz Hillman, and I'm so sorry if I say this wrong. I don't even want to try. Anyone else want to? Aiken Ray? I'm so sorry. Johnson. Both of those last two are Michigan players. So the leaders of the movement wanted to include women's basketball players on the call. Emmert only wanted to meet with Isaiah Livers, Baker, and Bohannon. One of the requests was for the NCAA to abide by Title IX, which they do not have to at the moment, which is kind of crazy. Any thoughts? And I'm so sorry for butchering that name and not even trying. I hate getting names wrong. I'm so bad.
My initial thought is Caitlin Clark. That's the name that sticks out to me more than any others. because I think Caitlin Clark is an athlete that even more so than like Naz Hillman or Isaiah Livers could be deeply benefiting right now from image and likeness because of her rise so quickly in her first year of school. That's my initial thought is I love seeing Caitlin Clark's name on there. My other thought is the NCAA doesn't have much of a leg to stand on right now. Amna, your thoughts though?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty clear with every side of the aisle, like we mentioned, roasting the NCAA. I think Clarence Thomas asked a question for the first time in like a very long time, and that was pretty unprecedented. So basically, what this case is really arguing here is whether, is this amateurism argument that the NCAA has used for so long to keep athletes where they are in that place, whether that's still something that should be done. And the AP report said, quote, this is about possible tens of thousands of dollars in education benefits for things such as computers, graduate scholarships, tutoring, study abroad, and internships. We're all students. We get access to those things. And the NCAA is arguing against these things in the Supreme Court. It just doesn't match up to me.
Justice Samuel Alito came out and said, quote, they face training requirements that leave little time or energy for study, constant pressure to put sports above study, pressure to drop out of hard majors and hard classes. Really shockingly, graduation rates only a tiny percentage ever go on to make, any money in professional sports. So the argument is they are recruited, they are used up, and they are cast aside without even a college degree. So they say, quote, how can this be defended in the name of amateurism? Right? If amateurism was the main goal, if academics was the main goal, then why are your graduation rates not through the roof in, all of the major college sports?
Yeah, and when you think of it too, like the NCAA saying they care about student athletes, why did they just put them all in a bubble in Indianapolis and San Antonio during midterms? Like midterms, exams, it's brutal time of the semester for most, right? And they've never cared about their academic achievements. They care that they make them money. And I want to add something to the point that I said 2 weeks ago. So the NCAA, as I said, during March alone makes like $900 billion, and even more through the year. That goes back into schools and conferences. Those schools and conferences then use that to have amazingly impressive athletic facilities that you could possibly live in, and to coaches. And this is a point brought up by Jalen Rose in the John Oliver Last Week Tonight video on the NCAA, which I highly recommend watching, that those coaches, that's not their only revenue stream. They can get it from a shoe deal. They can get it from a TV deal. They can have like 5 separate revenues when these athletes get nothing. And it's not like the NCAA themselves has to pay it. I mean, these are athletes that they already have somewhat of a pedestal to stand on, and they can use that when in the public eye to make money, to have a YouTube channel. And even like what you would consider small Olympic sport athletes. Like there was a runner at Texas A&M a few years ago who had to choose between YouTube and athletic career. And why can't these kids, they can't get a job because there's not time. So how else are they going to make money? How else are they going to sort of set themselves up for after? Because like you said, Gabby, only less than 2% in football and basketball specifically go pro. And it gets even lower in every other sport. And I'm glad the NCAA was, roasted yesterday because everyone saw it. They've lost the court of public opinion. They could still win this. I'd say don't get your hopes up too high. But yet Wednesday did not look good for the NCAA.
Nicole, you mentioned the YouTube piece of it. I'm so sorry. I did not mean to cut you off there. But you mentioned the YouTube piece of it. There's a player on UCLA named Jalen Clark. He's a freshman in college right now, and his YouTube channel is exploding because UCLA made it to the Final Four. But right now, he was describing how bad the Wi-Fi is at the hotel that they have to stay at in Indianapolis. So, like, not only has the NCAA restricted this, freshman in college from being able to profit off his image and likeness at like one of the most ripe times in his college career, like in his life, basically. His YouTube channel is exploding because of the situation he's in, because of the sport that he plays that's restricting him from benefiting off of it. But like the NCAA has also belligerently said, we don't care about you trying to go to Zoom University right now because we're going to give you terrible Wi-Fi, so you can't even log on to your Zoom classes. Like, if that doesn't shout, oh, we don't care, I don't know what does. I'm so sorry for cutting you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, just to both of your points. If they were treated like college students, and that's their reason for not being paid, they're not treated like college students. If you and I were to start a YouTube channel and say, this is what it's like at Arizona State, we would be able to make money off of that. Monetization wouldn't be a problem. But if they were to do that, they couldn't make any of that revenue. They're not treated as regular college students, and it's ridiculous to think that they are.
You make the exact right point that it's like a job. I think a lot of people, especially if you're trying to go D1, like most athletes in high school are, the thing you hear over and over and over is that they own you. It's a job, and it's very true. I did it for 1 week and a half back my freshman year for swimming. It was hell. I was like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get good grades? It didn't seem possible. And for so many of these kids, now there's so many of them that still do so well academically. And this could actually bring us into the free education argument that people bring up. Well, they get a free education. Well, a lot of that times at other like Stanford. I don't think Stanford, well, then they were in the pay for play thing, but anyways, so maybe. Back a few years ago, UNC was investigated and caught for having these paper classes that, essentially like, go take the easiest test in the world, you'll get an A, bring the GP up, and you can play. Like, you're eligible, you're academically eligible, which is kind of an insult. And not to mention, now this is again from John Oliver's Last Week Tonight video. So this was back in 2014, I believe, is when the investigation was completed, that they were taking African-American studies and Swahili classes. I'm not going to go on the Swahili point because I truly don't know where the language is spoken. And like they've said, they don't use it. But isn't it so insulting that an African-American studies is considered a, breeze, an easy class? Like, like there's just so much, there's layers and layers to this, that the free education thing it doesn't work because, again, why did they put them in a bubble in Indianapolis and San Antonio with terrible Wi-Fi?
Right. You mentioned it. Why would you give them access to the worst resources possible if you're going to push them into a bubble in the first place, and then tell them that they still have access to the same level of education? Why are you going to rip them from campus at the most stressful time of the year? We know this as 3 college students, in the throes of, we have 1 month left in our semester, we just had midterms, we have this, we have that, we are not student athletes. I think the best way I could put it was last night I was on the NCAA volleyball Instagram account, because a gal that I went to high school with now plays beach volleyball at Stanford, and she took over the account for the day. So I was utterly fascinated, because when she was in high school, she was a 4.4 student, 4.4 GPA, 4-sport athlete. Anything she picked up, she was great at it. She was so well-spoken. She was built to go to Stanford no matter what. She's also a young African-American woman doing this. So the odds are kind of stacked against her in so many different ways. And even without her athletic ability, she has all of the smarts in the world to go to any school in the nation. Just so happens as well that she's a phenomenal athlete. Her name is Zolani Hodel. She's a freshman right now at Stanford. And she posted like a calendar of what her weekly life looks like as a beach volleyball player at Stanford University. And I think I calculated the amount of hours that they spend training. This is just training. This is not traveling. This is not matches. They spend upwards of about 20 to 25 hours a week in the gym training. That is the bare minimum. That does not count extra treatment sessions they get. That does not count extra work that they're doing outside of practice to, potentially go to the Olympics or go pro on the AVP tour. So that right there, I think also spoke volumes to like, how are you supposed to work? How are you supposed to have an outside job? You cannot. Not as a full-time student, at least you cannot, unless you just literally don't want to sleep and just be a terrible athlete, right? So I mean, I think to know where this court case will go, it's obviously going to speak volumes if they do rule in favor of the NCAA. But guys, of course, transitioning from the Supreme Court to the basketball court, as we transition here, does anybody have anything else they would like to add to this entire multi-layered court case that is going to continue going on, long after we're done recording this show?
I'll say this. The NCAA, very, very long time ago, when they first started, coined the term student athlete so they could get away with this amateurism. But then we've seen how much, look how much March is thrown in your face, March Madness, 4 TV deals and whatnot, not to count out college football. NCAA owns you, and it's not right. And this amateurism thing, it has to go away because they're not amateurs. They're not treated like amateurs.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, all the layers to it. When we talk about sort of the African American studies as being quote unquote the paper class, and like there's definitely a layer to that where these are predominantly Black athletes, and the ones who are getting rich, the coaches, the executives at the NCAA level, they're white. Like it's just, that's a layer absolutely that goes into that. And we saw that sort of with the Pac-12 We Are United back in August. They had mentioned things about how this is built into systemic racism. So if we were able to see this sort of be dismantled at the Supreme Court level, hopefully we can see more of that come to light.
And I do have one more thing on that note. This was a few years back and it kind of lost steam, but during this whole not NCAA property thing reminded me that it was a few years ago, some mostly football players were considering, sort of sticking it to the NCAA. We'll just go to HBCUs and prove your point. I am a huge fan of that. And it speaks volumes how much Michigan, UCLA, Arizona State football teams would lose out on if these athletes went to the HBCU. And it would prove the NCAA's point. I am still a really big fan of it. And think of how many HBCU games we see. I'm talking mostly football at the moment, but it's like 2 on national television. I think we always get Grambling versus Southern and then the Celebration Bowl. And I think that's it. Now it's in the spring, we get more, and because Deion Sanders is a coach. But yeah, it's just, and I don't know how much of that is NCAA and just TV deals and how much they have a say in that. But I'm a huge fan of the athletes just saying, you know what, prove your point. We'll go to HBCUs. You'll follow us. You need us. The players have the power.
Well, the crazy part is that's exactly what Mikey Williams is trying to do right now. He's a high school basketball player. He's like 16 years old. He's the same age as LeBron James's oldest son, Bronny James Jr. And Mikey Williams has literally come out and said, I might just go to an HBCU. I don't care at this point. So not only in football, but it's also in basketball. And the idea of systemic racism in NCAA athletics is such a deeper conversation that we unfortunately can't get into, in our 30-minute block of time we have. But guys, transitioning from, of course, the Supreme Court to the basketball court, lots has happened in NCAA women's basketball. We now have a Final Four set. UConn is in it. They defeated Baylor just a few days ago. The ending of that game, well, it's up for grabs. UConn will face off against, the in-state rival here in Arizona, University of Arizona. Dare I speak their name, right? They're in the Final Four, though, and ASU didn't even make it to the Final Four. So it's UConn versus Arizona. And then, of course, another Pac-12 team. Stanford is facing off against Don Staley's South Carolina Gamecocks. Guys, what were your guys' initial thoughts when you saw this Final Four lineup?
Back to pack. Like, I know a lot of people have been talking about back to pack in terms of the men's tournament, which they've done phenomenal as well. And we see Gabby's UCLA team, but we have two teams in the Final Four in the women's. Let's start talking about it.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And Arizona and Stanford. Stanford's the number 1 overall seed too. Even in a sadly down year for ASU, like the conference was just a powerhouse. UCLA getting knocked out was a shock on the women's side. And the Pac-12 is probably the best conference in the women's basketball game, I would say. And yeah, let's start talking about the women's Pac-12 conference.
Yeah, exactly. You guys mentioned it. Let's start talking about the women's impact on the Final Four. To make up half the teams in the Final Four is pretty amazing, considering there are 320 that have a shot at making the Final Four, and there are another, that pool goes down to 64, of course, when you get to March Madness. So to have 2 of them come out of the same conference, when they're roughly about like a 13-hour drive from one another, is kind of incredible. Guys, UConn, though, their path to the Final Four was not exactly free of blemishes as it has been in the past. This is their 13th consecutive Final Four. Paige Bueckers was just named the AP Player of the Year for 2021. She's the first ever freshman to be named to earn that award. But their path to the Final Four from the Elite Eight was highly charged, competitive. They defeated Baylor off of what many people will say is a butchered call. Do you guys think that game was the game of the tournament, Baylor versus UConn in the Elite Eight?
Yeah, I mean, in the Elite Eight, yeah. I think we're going to get some great games in the Final Four, though. As far as the no call, if you saw my tweet, yeah, I'm not a fan of Kim, Baylor's coach, but I think that call is hard to make too. I think they could have been wrong either way, in my opinion, because I know she was on her elbow, but when they went up, where does gravity take you? Like, to me, that's more what happened. And also some of the non-calls on Baylor too, like it was very inconsistent officiating. And I think it was a good call to not inject themselves into the game. Also, run a better play. What were they doing? They were taking so much time off the clock trying to set something up that didn't work. Great defense by UConn, but they had the ball in the right player's hands at the end there, but the play it wasn't good either. Also, don't let UConn go on a 19-0 run and not call a timeout.
Amna, what about you?
Yeah, exactly. When I was watching it live, I was like, yeah, that's a pretty good no call. Like, it's just, you never want the refs to decide the game. And some may argue that by not calling that foul or would be foul, that's deciding the game. But then I looked at the picture and it doesn't look great. Like, there are 2 girls on her and the elbow, like, it's right there on her shooting elbow. It's not a great look, but if I'm the refs in that in real time, I wouldn't have called that. I was in the moment, I was like, yeah. And that's why sometimes it sucks when you can go back and see a full 4K HD picture and video saying, oh, you missed it. But I personally would rather see UConn keep going than Baylor, so it works out.
I was about to say, I'm more of a fan anyways of Paige Bueckers than I am of Kim Mulkey. So I'm going to let Paige Bueckers take this one. I'm going to let the Huskies take this one. I'm going to give them every ounce of credit in the world for what they did in that Elite Eight game. I'm also going to say shout out Dee Richards from Baylor. I wish I could call her a certain name, but I can't, unfortunately, because we're on live radio. I wish I could call her a bad word, like bad ASS, because that's exactly what she is. What an inspiration in college basketball. because of what she had to go through. She was paralyzed at one point due to like nerve damage in her back. She was literally paralyzed, and she came back and began playing again after only about like 6 weeks of rehabilitation. In that game, of course, Dee Richards was the reason why Baylor was dominating. And then after she went down with injury, that was when they went on, that was when UConn went on the 19-0 run. Give UConn every ounce of credit in the world. They obviously cannot control injury, and they cannot control what the referee calls in the game. But the idea that Kim Mulkey is just going to blame the referees for the fact that her team, couldn't keep it together in the fourth quarter of an Elite Eight basketball game, then I'm sorry, you don't deserve to go to the Final Four if you cannot close out a basketball game. Because at the end of the day, it's not about how you start, and it's not about what you can't control. My favorite thing my father always told me was you can control three things in sports. It's the acronym ACE. You can control your attitude, your communication, and your effort. That does not include injury. That does not include what the referee calls on court. Clearly, Kim Mulkey didn't think about controlling her communication with her team because she never called a timeout. She didn't control her attitude after the game because her attitude was absolute crap. Her attitude was, let's stop COVID-19 testing and let's throw a hissy fit at the referees for the fact that my team gave up an 11-point lead with like 7 minutes to play. And then you can control your effort. Sorry to say it, but your best player goes down. That is the time when your team has to rise. If you want to win a national title, that's when your team has to rise. Your team cracked under pressure. You let a freshman dominate you, go off for 28 points, and look like the unsung hero of the basketball game because you couldn't control your attitude, your communication, and your effort when you needed to the absolute most. I don't have time, and I don't have the darn energy to hear a coach complain about one call at the end of an Elite Eight basketball game where they were in control for roughly 32 of for probably 24 of the 32 minutes of the basketball game. I don't have time for it. I don't have energy for it. Guys, that's looking backwards, though. That's the Elite Eight. Mulkey's no longer in the picture. It's Gino Auriemma versus Adia Barnes. It's two programs that are in very different places right now. Nonetheless, they both earned their right to be in the Final Four. On the other side, it's Tara Vanderveer, of course, Stanford versus Dawn Staley at South Carolina. What are your guys' picks in this Final Four?
Oh, this is tough. I can't bet against UConn though, not now. With Paige Beckers, it's in that Baylor game. Really, they kind of proved themselves a little bit. Not that they had to, but in their fight to get back in that game that Baylor controlled most of, like you said, Gabby. I got UConn, and I'm having a hard time picking Stanford, South Carolina, because in my bracket I do have UConn, Stanford. But the more I watch Dawn Staley's team, the more I like them. And it's really hard for me to root against them. I got UConn, South Carolina. And then I do still have UConn winning the championship.
Amna, what about you?
Yeah, I would have to agree with Nicole. It is tough to pick these games. I do see UConn beating out Arizona. And the other game, I think it's a coin flip for me. I really couldn't tell you one way or the other. But I'll just say I love seeing WNBA coaches in the Final Four. Like, that's what I'm going to be focusing on and loving.
You mentioned it, the coaches the coaches in the Final Four, it feels like it can be a coin flip for both games. Because I picked Stanford 2 weeks ago, I'm still going to pick Stanford to beat South Carolina. Just because I'd rather not my bracket get totally destroyed like it did on the men's side. But I'd rather my bracket not get totally murdered this weekend. So I think Stanford's going to win against South Carolina. And then I think UConn's going to beat Arizona. As much as I would love to hashtag back the pack there, as much as I would love to agree with Amna there, I'm not going to bet against a 13th straight trip to the Final Four. Gino Auriemma and Paige Beckers, especially Paige Beckers, I'm sold. I'm selling my soul to UConn and Stanford. Moving on, guys, of course, from what's going on court at the NCAA women's tournament to what's going on off the court. Huge movement on social media once again has, essentially it actually took away from what was going on the court for a couple of days with the disparity in weight rooms, the disparity in resourcing between men's and women's basketball. And Nicole, we'll start with you. What were your initial thoughts when you saw what was going on at the NCAA women's tournament just about a week and a half ago?
Yeah, and I'll be quick. It was trash. I mean, who in their right mind, especially the weight room, thought that was right? And you can say, oh well, the NCAA women's tournament loses money. Well, it's the NCAA's, it's their issue to invest in these women, to give them the opportunity to play at their top level, and they didn't do that here. And like Mark Emmert said, they really dropped the ball. But then calling on the woman in the tournament to be like, okay, what kind of equalities do you want? Like, give me a break. Just treat them the same. It's not that hard. These women deserve the attention and the investment.
Amna, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. And we could talk for so long about how this, would go into violation of Title IX and everything, as they claim to be amateur. But you mentioned it, Nicole. Like, these women deserve investment. Like, people are paying attention. Like, Sedona Prince didn't blow up for nothing, and Paige Beckers doesn't have 500,000 followers for nothing. These women they have something that people are attracted to, and they're getting ratings. We're seeing that more and more. I imagine that's going to go up in the Final Four in the national championship game. But if we keep investing in these women as they're showing us that they have something to say on and off the court, that revenue will start going up, and it'll start matching their initial investment that they're putting in.
Yeah, of course, it's going to start matching investment. Like, if you invest in them, they will invest in you, and the game can only grow from there. To just kind of wrap up this part, I want to pull a quote. This is on the impact that Sedona Prince had, and basically that social media and the Oregon Ducks had on this movement. This is from a University of Oregon women's basketball reporter, Carly Ebasuya. She works for the Daily Emerald in Eugene, Oregon. She says, quote, "I think what Sedona did specifically in her social media presence just started the conversation. It's not just about the weight room and that's it. No, it doesn't end there. It doesn't end until professional women's soccer players get paid equally. It doesn't end until WNBA players get paid equally. It doesn't end until gender disparities in sports end. Even though Sedona started the conversation now, it doesn't end here." I think that pretty much sums it up, guys. There is so much work the NCAA has to do. But of course, transitioning from what's going on off the court, something that's just not quite as fun as what's going on the basketball court. NCAA men's Final Four, guys. Nicole's shaking her head at me because it's time for some UCLA Bruin basketball, guys. I didn't have them going as far as they have. But here they are. They're from first four to Final Four. The Bruins will be facing off against Gonzaga. And then, of course, on the other side, UCLA upsets Michigan. Well, now Gonzaga versus UCLA. Then on the other side, we got Baylor versus Houston. Number 1 overall seed Baylor, number 2 overall seed Houston. So 2 teams from Texas, a team from the Pac-12, and then the West Coast Conference champions, a team that has gone absolutely undefeated this season in the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Guys, I guess I'll start with Nicole. Her facial expression is not too happy. Nicole, how are you doing right now?
Okay, well, I think we're almost out of time. I almost cried on Tuesday night. I won't lie. That was painful. I mean, it looked like 2 teams playing at 10 o'clock at night in the beginning. Michigan wasn't shooting. No one was shooting well except Shondi Brown. And, I think it was on all the players. No one shot well. No one could make a layup in the final 3 minutes of the game. And, I think that Wagner shot at the end that completely missed the basket will haunt people's memories for a while. But I think it was still a great season for Michigan. They were clearly having an off night. I like the chance to go for 3 there, honestly. I know I get mad and say just drive to the rim, but in a game like that where they miss layups for the last 3 minutes and they could have tied it, Yeah, go for the win. Honestly, like what I do think I don't know if they got the look they want. I don't know if they got the player they want. I would have so rather that be Sean D. Brown taking the shot or Eli Brooks, but Michigan was still the better team. They should have won, and they were really good at beating themselves. But congrats, Gabby.
Thank you, Nicole. Amna, what about you?
Just pushing it forward. Sorry, Gabby. I have Gonzaga winning. I think as most people do. I don't like my bracket is butchered, slashed 10 ways in different ways. But at least I could have Gonzaga winning.
Don't worry. I went on this show a couple of weeks ago and I had Michigan winning it all. I've never been so happy that my bracket officially got obliterated. On Tuesday night. I'm just gonna say this: Johnny Juzang, inject that man into my veins. 28 points on 11 of 18 from the field. The sophomore from Harvard Westlake is an absolute stud, folks. The University of Kentucky transfer, who only averaged 2.9 points per game, is the reason why UCLA went from the first four to the final four. Because I'm going to be honest with y'all. Halftime of that Michigan State game, they're down 13 points in the first four matchup. I thought that was it. I thought the season was done. I am not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, I had them going to the Final Four the whole time. I had to be on drugs to do that. Like literally, Nicole, I'm pretty sure had them knocked out in like the first four. And then I'd have to look back at my bracket to see where I had them getting knocked out. But I didn't have them going this far. So Johnny Juzang, I praise you with every fiber of my being. Of course, it's just, I think it's fun and exciting to see a team go from first four to Final Four, even if they have to obliterate your bracket. And Nicole, I'm sorry about your Michigan Wolverines, but the kind of performance that I've seen from Johnny Juzang really mirrors a performance like a Kemba Walker about a decade ago when he was at UConn. And he took that team, through the Big East tournament. They had to win the Big East tournament to just qualify to get into NCAAs. They finally got into NCAAs and they ran through that tournament. They won 6 games in a row and eventually became national champions. All kind of on the back of Kemba Walker and just really, really great defense. That's how I see this UCLA team has gotten through it. Just really great, murderous defense. They've gotten a couple of lucky breaks, I think, as well. The fact that Michigan could never cash in the other night. It wasn't like Michigan didn't have opportunities, right, to score that basket. But it's exciting. It's exciting to see Westwood so fired up again, because my first NCAA tournament I ever watched was in 2007, 2008, when UCLA went to back-to-back Final Fours. So this is the first time I ever watched it. It's the first memory I have of college basketball. So the fact that it's come full circle 13, 14 years later is just a very special thing to me personally. Guys, Amna, you mentioned it already. You have Gonzaga winning it all. Nicole, who are you taking now in this, in the last four?
Well, I'll be interested to see what UCLA does defensively, because they were very good defensively against Michigan. I'll be very curious to see what they do against Jalen Suggs and Gonzaga. I think this is close in the first half, and I think Gonzaga runs away with it after that. I like Gonzaga. Baylor Houston is interesting, but man, it's hard to choose against Baylor the way they've looked. Houston has stuttered step a little bit. I like Baylor, and then I like Gonzaga over Baylor.
Yeah, I see my head has to pick Gonzaga, but my heart's just gonna say UCLA, because at this point, why would I bet against them? I would be dumb not to at this point, as the Southern California native that I am. Because you've already upset 5 of the teams, so why not upset a 6th one, right? So I'm gonna go with UCLA over Gonzaga. I'm probably gonna be eating my words in about 2 days, but I thought I was gonna be eating my words against Michigan, and that didn't happen. So I think Baylor's gonna beat Houston. I really, really do. Baylor's in the Final Four for the first time since like 1951. The men's team is in the Final Four for the first time since 1951. The women's team won the national title in 2019. ESPN, thank you. Baylor men's basketball is in the Final Four for the first time in like 70 years. Baylor women's just won a national title 2 years ago. Let's differentiate that on social media. Thank you very much. But yeah, I got Baylor versus UCLA, the national title game. From there, why not? Let's pick the Bruins. Why not? Guys, of course, it's been a fun show for myself. Amna, thank you so much for coming on today and joining us. Any last thoughts on this week's episode of The Future is Female, guys?
And where can people find you? Where can people find your work?
My work, you can find me on Twitter at Amna__Subhan. For some reason, the other ones were taken. So the other Amna Subhans, thank you for taking that.
I didn't realize there were that many Amna Subhans in the world.
Same. Well, I had so much fun. Thank you guys for having me.
Of course, for Nicole Pinter and our special guest host today, Amna Subhan, I am Gabrielle Ducharme. We are The Future is Female. We will see you all after the college basketball season ends next week. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay healthy.